Hello, History of Sexuality students. This is Professor Bowen here. In this video, I wanted to share some advice on how to put together a good, high-quality research proposal. As you know, for this class, you'll be designing and carrying out an original research project on a topic of your choosing. The first assignment for this project is your proposal, which is where you'll indicate the general topic that you're interested in, put forward a specific research question in connection with that topic, and identify some primary and secondary sources that could help you get at this question. If you look on Moodle, you'll see that I've already posted a couple videos on how to find good primary and secondary sources on topics within the history of sexuality. So I'm not going to repeat any of that advice here. What I'd like to focus on here has to do with the other parts of your proposal, that is, finding a topic and coming up with a research question related to it. How do I come up with a good topic for my paper, you might be asking yourself, and what can I do to ensure that my research question is a good one? These are the specific things I'd like to tackle in what follows. First, let's talk about topics. Obviously, for this project, you want to research something that interests you, but if this is the first time you've done research on sexuality, and specifically the history of sexuality, you might actually not know that much about the various topics that you could explore within this field. What kinds of things do historians of sexuality investigate? Well, here I have some good news, because the answer is pretty much everything. Today, in 2021, history of sexuality is a well-known, well-established field all across the world, and because of this, the field has an incredibly broad reach. The study of it encompasses many different institutions and areas of life, including religion, morality, medicine and science, the law, the state, the media, the arts, popular culture, etc. In your project, you could focus on any of those domains, and you could do so covering a wide range of phenomena. Phenomena including things like sexually transmitted diseases, which is what I myself research, sexology, prostitution, sex education, pornography, masturbation, birth control, abortion, reproduction, marriage, divorce, infertility, impotence, eugenics, rape and sexual violence, nudism, sadistic fantasies, moral panics, clothing and fashion, dancing, and, of course, the history of any particular form of sexuality, that is, homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, asexuality, pansexuality, etc. When researching these things, you could select a number of different historical actors as your primary research subjects. You could write about doctors and patients. You could write about social movements and the people who lead and partake in these. You could talk about writers or artists or musicians. You could focus on governmental officials, on religious leaders, on children and youth, and on the list goes. Fortunately, historians have written lots and lots of books and articles on all of these things, which makes any of them fair game as far as your own research goes. Now, having established that the history of sexuality encompasses literally everything under the sun, I should also say that historians have not devoted equal attention to all of the topics outlined above. Nor have their approaches to these topics been spread out in an egalitarian fashion. Some things have been investigated more than others, and some methods of investigation are more popular than others. As you begin looking for sources, you'll probably notice that historians have privileged studies of unconventional sexualities, that is, sexualities that are unusual, rare, and or marginalized. Given the fact that societies have long been obsessed with controlling quote-unquote deviant sexualities, this is perhaps not surprising because there's abundant primary source material on this, particularly within the discipline of sexology, which is probably the most trod over topic in the whole field. Historians have spent lots and lots of time studying how sexologists and other sex experts invented and treated various kinds of deviant sexualities. And they talk about how their writings contributed to the policing and the suppression of things that they deemed, quote-unquote, pathological. This is part of the reason that we have so many historical accounts of homosexuality. Much less, however, has been written about the construction of quote-unquote normal sexualities. For example, how did heterosexuality become a marker of normality? There are certainly people who examine this, including my own partner, Professor Alpert, whose research explores how matchmakers in contemporary Japan are trying to promote heterosexuality by convincing men and women to keep marrying each other at a time when few have the economic resources needed to get married and start families. In your research, you can decide to take advantage of the voluminous scholarship on marginalized sexualities. Or, if you want, you can contribute to the very new research trend, which is the study of heterosexuality. Another thing I want to mention here has to do with the specific aspect of sexuality that you're going to study. As we've all learned, sexuality is an incredibly vast and messy thing. It includes not just our behaviors and our experiences, but also our desires, our thoughts, our attitudes, etc. Generally speaking, when historians have researched this, they've focused not on sexuality as a physical act, that is, on what people actually do with their bodies, but instead on sexuality as discourse. For example, how sexuality has been categorized, classified, and written about, especially in terms of prohibitions, restrictions, and definitions of proper and improper behavior. There, I think, are good reasons for focusing on this. As many scholars have pointed out, if we really want to understand the past, then we first have to understand the concepts that people in the past used to make sense of the things that were happening in their lives. Given this, it's really kind of incumbent upon us to devote attention to learning about how categories like normal versus abnormal or central versus marginal got made in the first place, and to see how the boundaries between these were policed and enforced. But of course, with all of this focus on discourse, we run the risk of marginalizing the act of sex itself. So as you think about your topic, you might benefit from asking yourself, do I want to focus on people's sexual behaviors and experiences, or am I more interested in what people said or wrote about sexuality? A final word on topics, and then I'll get to some advice on formulating a research question. As I say in the instructions for this assignment, your topic should neither be too broad nor too narrow. When you begin thinking about your topic, you're most likely going to start with your most general research interests. You might think, for example, okay, I'm really interested in the history of sexuality in 19th century Russia. Or, I don't know, I'd really like to learn more about homosexuality in Islamic societies. These are perfectly fine places to start, and I would indeed recommend that the first way you refine the scope of your project is by selecting a specific geographical and chronological context you want to work within, like, say, for example, United States history in the 20th century. But this is still a bit too broad. We'll need to refine things even more than this. You could begin by adding a topical element to your project, perhaps from choosing among the many topics that I just listed. Having done this, you can then start to zoom in even more on the specific place, people, or time period you want to cover. This is undoubtedly going to take a long time to finalize, so please don't worry if I come back to you with comments like, "Can we zoom in on a particular aspect of this topic, please?" Or, "Is there some way you can narrow this down a bit more?" My expectation is that your project will evolve considerably over the semester, as it really does take lots of work just to determine what it is you want to write about. Just bear in mind that this is a small project, and that as such, you can really only tackle a very small part of the broader thing you're interested in. So just be content to bite off a small piece of it for now, and make sure you chew and digest that little bite thoroughly. Now, to your research question. This is the single most important part of your project, and as such, you should expect to spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. Again, I don't expect you to have a finalized version of this by the end of the week. You will continue to tweak it over the course of the semester, and it will change to reflect the kinds of information contained in your sources. In historical research, as in other research, it is incredibly common to discover that the question that you initially started out with isn't actually answerable, at least not with the sources that you've got at hand. If that happens, don't think that you're doing anything wrong. You're not. This is totally normal, and it happens like 150% of the time. There are an awful lot of questions about the past that we just can't even begin to answer. So if you find yourself in this situation, please don't get discouraged. You have basically two options. If you want, you can keep looking for primary sources in the hope that you'll eventually uncover something that speaks to your question, or you could amend your question, changing it to something that your existing sources actually do address. This second strategy is probably the better one, especially given how little time you have to do this research. So as to make the process of coming up with a good research question a bit easier, it might help to bear in mind the following. Historical thinking is reflexive and backward-looking. Often, when we begin a new project, we're interested in figuring out things like, what was the impact that this thing had on later developments? Or how did it contribute to our current day state of affairs? This is a perfectly natural and okay way to begin things, but it's not really the best way to proceed. It's generally not how research in academic history proceeds. In academic history, we tend to start with a known thing and then work backward from this to try to figure out what caused that thing to happen. For example, we might begin with the widely known fact that World War II happened, and then move backward from this to try to figure out what caused that war. You can apply this technique to your own projects, and I think it will help you come up with a more focused, specific, answerable research question. Start with a known fact, and then move backward from there to try to uncover its causes. That's, of course, not the only way to generate a good historical research question, but it is a tried and true method. Okay, I think that's all I've got to say for now. Thanks for watching this video. I hope that the guidance I've attempted to provide here proves helpful. If not, or if you have questions about the first part of your research project, please feel free to come visit me during office hours or to set up an appointment. You can also send me an email or a Telegram post or comment on Instagram or YouTube, whatever works best for you. I'm really excited to see what ideas you come up with for your projects, and I look forward to discussing them with you next week in the discussion board. Until then, be safe and be well. Bye-bye for now.